In this video we're going to talk about specular maps, bump maps, diffuse maps, and normal maps, all different types of information that we can apply to our materials. And so when we export them to the games, all this information will show up in the game engine. We have three of the four maps here. The normal map's going to be made from the bump map. So both normal maps and bump maps are very similar. They're just used for different purposes. In this case, this is our bump map, and it's misnamed here, but this is the bump map. And you can see that the information here is basically just a simple height map. This could also be used as a displacement map. But the areas that are lighter, like these bricks, are going to come more forward, and the areas that are darker are going to recede into the mesh more, or at least look like they recede into the mesh more. It actually doesn't displace the map at all. It's an illusion that we use with light. So it's a grayscale map, and you can draw these or you can convert them from photographs if you want. This one here is our specular map. It's similar. They're usually a little bit more contrasty. The dark areas are going to receive no specular highlights or less specular highlights. The lighter the area, the more light will be reflected back at the camera. So you can think of it as painting light onto your texture. So anywhere that you want it to be more shiny or more light bounced back at the viewer, player, camera, whatever it is you're using, you would make it lighter. So for instance, this area right here will reflect a lot of light back, where these dark areas here are going to reflect hardly any light back in the grout here. This is a diffuse map, and a diffuse map isn't just a photograph. It's a photograph that's had its shadows removed, so you can make them from photographs. But its shadow and its light information, I shouldn't say light information, its specular information has been removed, and most of that's done through cloning or brushing over the areas. I use the patch tool and the clone tool a lot to do that. But for instance, there was some shadows right under here, under these bricks. That's all been removed, and you can see this area here, if I zoom in, right here, there is some light information. That little chips there are a little bit lighter, but for the most part the information's been removed from the texture. And you just do that using the clone tool, the patch tool, and your brush tool. There's really no big trick to it. It doesn't take too long. And if you're taking pictures of fairly flat things, sometimes you don't have to do it at all. But a diffuse map just has the color information. So think of it as only the color of the materials is in that map. Now, we do need a normal map, and a normal map is our fourth type of map. A normal map is made from our bump map, and we don't have that showing here. So let's go through how to get these types of maps. I'm going to close down this one and this one, and just start with my diffuse map like I usually would. And to get your bump information, now in this case most of these areas are pretty low, they're darker, that we want to be lower. You can just desaturate your image, and you can see right now we're pretty close. We have our darkest information here is down below, and our light information, the higher information are the bricks, and they're a little bit lighter in color. And I tend to go back over here under contrast and play with the contrast to see if I can kind of get the information I want. And I'm going to make it a little bit less contrasty, a little bit more bright. And now if I zoom in here, you'll see that these areas are going to recede while the bricks are going to push out. Now you can always use your paintbrush tool to come in here and paint in areas if you need to push them back down in. So you'd paint the grout darker if you wanted to do that. In my case, the grout really isn't that much lower than the brick, so I don't want to push it back too far. I also like to use this filter. It's called the surface blur filter. And what that's going to do, if I get my settings right here, there we go, is make this a little bit sharper. There we go. And I've kind of come in here, and you can see with it off. So here's with it off. Let's make it a little bit higher. Let me get it so you can actually see what it's doing here. There we go. The settings are different for each picture. So here it is off, and here it is on. You can see it changing over in this image. But with it on, it tends to even out the detail a little bit more. So it's not going to be quite as bumpy, but I find that it kind of makes the image a little bit easier to work with on the bump map, and the normal map as well. And that radius a little bit too high, so I'm going to lower that. We'll apply that. And this could be my bump map. It's pretty close. Now to make a specular map, actually I'll show you what. Let's open up our other bump map that we had here. There we go. And there we go. That's our bump map. And you can see that it's a little bit more contrasty than the one I made, so we just have to come over here and bump the contrast up on this one. I can bump the brightness down. We can get very close. This one's also had the grout drawn in using a dark brush. It's a black. And I'm in a different layer. And I could come in here and draw in these areas. Need a smaller brush though. There we go. And then just burn them down into the surrounding areas. So I could come in here, draw these in, because that's pushing those back down. And then I can put this on one of my layers, like soft light. Knock the fill down a little bit, and you can see that kind of pushes those areas back down farther. Now this one's already done. This is the one I'm going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one. I'm not going to save it because that's my color map. So this is our bump map. And let's go and open up our specular map real quick. There we go. And you can see the specular map is similar. The dark areas are not going to bounce back as much light, where the lighter areas are going to be bouncing back more light. And there's some areas that are almost highlighted, like little edges here, where the light's really going to shine back. And they're similar in making these. I'm going to open up my diffuse again. Where is it? There it is. It's also called a color map. That's why it's got a C on it. Oops. There we go. And to make one of these specular maps, I think they're a little trickier than bump maps. I'm going to again go and get the information out on the color. And you can see that we're kind of bland here compared to this. I like to go over here to the levels and play with the levels until I can get something that's a little more isolated. You can see here my light is starting to come through a little bit more. I don't want too much. So let's see what we can get here. That's getting closer. And then I go back to my contrast and brightness, and I adjust these down until I can get something close. A little bit brighter there, I think. There we go. I need a new layer. Okay. Okay, similar thing, and then I would come in here. I tend to use soft light for this, and you can see it's really going to kind of kill off a lot of those highlighted areas. You can also use multiply, which is right here, and then knock the fill amount down on multiply, and you'll see you'll get something similar to this result with that, and that you won't get those little sparky areas in there. And I can just kind of come in here and knock out any lighter areas that I don't want to be reflecting back light. There's no real automatic way to make these maps. You're going to have to get in here and color them using brushes. Not really any automatic way. You can see I have to kind of keep scaling my brush up and down even to get this one to behave. So this area here we color out. And we get something similar to this when we're all done. Again, I'm not going to save this one. So this is my specular map. Pay special attention to any areas that aren't on your diffuse map that you want more color to show or more light to show back on. And it's not always a matter of just converting the diffuse map into grayscale, bumping up the contrast. You really got to get in there and think about which areas are going to shine back light. Now, our normal map, here, let's start with our bump map, is a bump map. So we have to start with basic bump map information. Higher or lighter areas are a little bit higher, darker areas are going to be a little bit lower. And then I use an NVIDIA plugin. You can make normal maps a lot of different ways. I'm going to use the NVIDIA plugin for this, and the link for the NVIDIA plugin will be on the screen here. You'll have to go get it. It does not ship with Photoshop. You'll have to install it. We talked about that before. And it's here in my Photoshop. Here we go. Now, here I've already got it set up, but you can see it's going to give me the normal map information. Normal maps are always this bluish purple color. That's the three different axes of light mixing together, and you're getting these, there's some color bands running through here. They're pretty obvious when you see them. In this filter, I tend to leave it at 4 samples, but you can click these buttons to get different kind of blur settings on it. And I've set the scale at 12. You can change that, and you'll see that it's changing over here. I want the bricks to look a little bit deep. I'll change it to 8 for this. And the rest of this information I usually leave alone. I'm just going to hit OK. I'm saving this as a TIFF in this case. So this is my normal map. I could save this. I've already made one that I'm going to use. Now I'll exit out of Photoshop here. In Max, I've made a simple scene here with a plane. I've got an omni-light and a spotlight. And if I render this, this is what I have to start with. It's just a gray wall. You'll have this brick on your scene. You can just drag one of these shaders over and start again. But you'll see the final result that we're after. And I've got a couple shaders here. I've got one shader with just diffuse in the diffuse map. So if I go up here, you'll see just the diffuse map is here. Again, that's what my diffuse map looks like. A shader with just the specular map on it. And again, here's what the specular map looks like. And a shader with just the bump map. Not the normal map, but the bump map. And here's what the bump map looks like. And then I've brought in the images here because I'm going to drag them to make a new shader, which I've already done in this case. But I'm going to drag just the diffuse map over. And if I render this, you'll see that's just the diffuse map. So nothing else. It's just an image that's been projected onto that plane. If I drag just the specular map over, that's the light information that's being reflected back. And you'll see those bricks are a little bit brighter. The grout is a little bit duller. And here's just the bump map. And you'll see that I'm getting just bump information. So if we combine those three, and I'll make a new shader here, and I'll show you how I've done this. I've dragged each of these images into their own slot, And that gives you this solid box. That just means that's an image map. So I've done that with each of these. And I'll come down here to a new shader, go to maps, and I'm going to drag each of these into its slot. So I'll make these an instance. Again, we'll render, here let's drag this guy over. I'll render this, that's just the diffuse channel. The next one is going to be the, go back down here. The next one is going to be the diffuse and specular channel, although the highlight is not set yet. And the next one is going to be, this one is our, oh, I put the wrong one in. Okay. Let's undo that. Okay. Wrong one. This is my specular. This was my bump. Okay. So this is the diffuse, that's the bump, that's the specular. Diffuse or color map. Specular and bump map. And now if I render this, this is all three maps combined without the highlight set. And you'll see that we're getting some bumpiness, specular and color. And now I'm going to jump up here and we're going to set the highlight to be pretty sharp. And what I'll get is something that looks a little bit more like a brick wall. Probably a little bit more base on that guy. There we go. There we go. So we've combined all three maps and we've got ourselves a pretty good looking brick wall now. Now that normal map that we had, I'm going to jump back over to this particular texture I made. I'm going to take the bump map out of this now, render this again so you'll see what it looks like. So no bumpiness on it. And I'm going to go get the normal map inserted in here instead of the bump map. Remember, the normal map was made from the bump map, but we want normal maps to export out to our games, not so much bump maps. We need that axis information so as our character or prop moves around in the scene, the light's going to react with the bumpiness of the character or prop. And so under bump, I'm going to go under normal bump, normal bitmap. I'll go get my normal map, and it's on there now. I'm going to go ahead and drag this normal map over here just so you can have a slot for it. And real quickly, I'm going to put a normal bump in here, and I'm going to drag this down to this slot. And now my normal map is on here. Drag this guy over. And if we go back up here, we'll render this. And you can see now that that normal map is on the surface. And if I grab this one has all three combined in it now. And that's all my information with a normal map instead of a bump map. It's going to look about the same. But if I exported this, I would have three different maps, a diffuse map, a normal map, and a specular map. And then those could go into my game. So as far as your props go, you can make those three different types of maps and make your normal maps from your bump maps over in Photoshop.